uncover the latest mysteries before anyone else. By supporting our original Sherlock Holmes adventures on Patreon, you unlock early access to our stories long before their YouTube debut. Your monetary support is the secret to keeping this channel alive. The link to our Patreon is in the description below. It is a matter of record to those who have followed the chronicles of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes with any degree of attention that the year 1903 was one of singular activity for him. Our quarters at Baker Street were frequently the focal point of inquiries that ranged from the delightfully trivial to the deeply profound. I recall a certain Tuesday morning when we were visited in rapid succession by a distressingly tearful dowager seeking a lost pug, and a grim-faced official from the Bank of England whispering of impending financial ruin. Yet even among the myriad of strange problems that presented themselves to his acute intellect during that period, few possessed the curious blend of exotic intrigue and high international stakes as the singular affair of the Sultan's stallion. It was in the latter days of June, a time when London was baking beneath a relentless, oppressive sun. The heavy air of the metropolis hung stagnant over the thoroughfares, smelling faintly of hot dust and softening asphalt. It was the sort of weather that drove anyone with the means to do so toward the cooler climes of the countryside, seeking refuge in the green shade of Surrey, or the bracing breezes of the Sussex coast. Holmes, however, possessed a constitution that seemed wholly indifferent to the vagaries of climate. While I sat near the open window, panting like a hound in the heat, and longing for the shaded lawns of my youth, my companion was engaged in a vigorous chemical experiment at his acid-stained wooden table. He moved with a wiry energy, his thin frame hunched over an array of glassware. The pungent, biting odour of hydrochloric acid competed with the thick fumes of his abominable shag tobacco, creating an atmosphere in our sitting room that was nothing short of suffocating. "My dear Watson," Holmes remarked suddenly without lifting his eyes from the bubbling retort before him, "you are contemplating a retreat to the Sussex Downs, and yet you feel a pang of guilt at the thought of leaving me to my own devices in this urban furnace." I started in my chair, wiping the perspiration from my brow with a handkerchief. "Upon my word, Holmes, you have an uncanny knack for reading my mind. But how could you possibly know that? I have not uttered a single syllable for the past hour." Holmes chuckled a dry, rasping sound and carefully adjusted the flame of his Bunsen burner. The blue light cast harsh shadows across his sharp, hawkish features. "It is not a matter of telepathy, Watson, but of simple observation and deduction. For the past 15 minutes your eyes have continually darted toward the copy of the Bradshaw Railway Guide resting upon the mantelpiece. You then gazed out the window with a look of profound melancholy, your hand unconsciously rubbing the slight twinge in your left leg, a sure sign that the damp heat is affecting your old Jezile bullet wound. Finally, your eyes rested upon my own hunched form, and your brow furrowed in a distinct expression of solicitous anxiety. The chain of reasoning is elemental. It is simple enough when you explain it, I admitted, somewhat ruefully. But I confess the heat is becoming intolerable. Are you not tempted to seek a change of scenery? The criminal classes of London must surely be too lethargic to engage in their usual enterprises. Holmes sighed and leaned back in his chair, his long, thin fingers pressed together in a steeple. It is true that the domestic front has been deplorably quiet of late. A purloined necklace in Mayfair, a rather pedestrian case of blackmail in Kensington. Hardly the sort of fare to stimulate a mind that craves the sharp edge of a genuine problem. The Mayfair business was resolved before luncheon, and the blackmailer was so clumsy he practically left his calling card. My brain, Watson, is like a racing engine, tearing itself to pieces because it is not connected up with the work for which it was built. I need a problem, a brain teaser, something that requires the full exertion of my faculties. I crave the intricate knot, the seemingly impossible contradiction. As if in answer to his plea, a sharp knock sounded at the door, and our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, entered bearing a silver salver. Upon it lay a single, heavily sealed envelope. "A letter for you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, her voice tinged with a note of awe. "Delivered by a most extraordinary gentleman, sir. He arrived in a closed carriage and was dressed in the most outlandish foreign garb. Silks and a red hat, Mr. Holmes, right here on Baker Street." Holmes's eyes gleamed as he snatched the envelope from the tray. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. That will be all." As the door closed behind her, Holmes held the envelope up to the light, inspecting it with the intensity of a jeweller examining a raw stone. It was crafted of thick, cream-coloured vellum, and the seal was pressed in dark crimson wax. "What do you make of it, Watson?" he asked, tossing it across to me. I examined the missive carefully, feeling the heavy, expensive texture of the paper. The paper is of exceptional quality, likely of foreign manufacture. The seal bears an intricate design, a crescent moon and a star, surrounded by Arabic calligraphy. It has the look of something official, perhaps diplomatic. "Excellent, Watson. You are improving," Holmes commended, his lassitude vanishing in an instant. He rubbed his hands together with a sound like dry leaves. "It is indeed diplomatic. In fact, it is a communication from the highest authority of the Ottoman Empire. The seal is the Tuhra, the official signature of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, a monarch who rarely communicates directly with private citizens." I stared at the letter in astonishment. The Sultan of Turkey. But what could he possibly want with a consulting detective in London? "That, my dear doctor, is precisely what we are about to discover," Holmes replied, producing his pearl-handled letter-opener and deftly slicing through the top of the envelope. He extracted a single sheet of paper, covered in elegant flowing script. As he read, his grey eyes narrowed, and a smile of intense satisfaction played upon his thin lips. "The engine is connected to the work, Watson," he declared, springing to his feet and pacing the length of the room. "The game is afoot, and it leads us far beyond the familiar, foggy streets of London." "To Constantinople?" I asked, my own pulse quickening at the prospect of an adventure, the oppressive heat of the room suddenly forgotten. "Precisely. Pack your bags, my friend. A light kit will suffice, but do not forget your service revolver. We depart on the evening express for Paris, and from thence we shall take the Orient Express to the very edge of the East." "But what is the nature of the case, Holmes?" I pressed, bewildered by his sudden burst of energy. "Has there been a murder? A theft of state secrets?" Holmes paused, holding the letter aloft. "It is a matter that strikes at the very heart of the Sultan's pride and the stability of his throne. A substitution, Watson, a most audacious and baffling substitution. We are tasked with finding a horse." "A horse?" I echoed, unable to conceal my disappointment. The Sultan of Turkey summons you across the continent merely to find a missing horse? Surely he has entire regiments of cavalry to search for stray animals. Not merely a missing horse, Watson, Holmes corrected, his tone turning grave, returning to his chair. The horse in question is Ruzgar, the Wind, a legendary Akalteke stallion, the undisputed jewel of the imperial stables, and the stallion is not missing. That is the crux of the matter. The Sultan claims that the horse currently residing in his private stable, a creature identical in every physical respect to his prize stallion, is a cleverly disguised impostor. An impostor? But surely, if it is identical— That is the mystery, Watson. The Sultan is a man consumed by paranoia, constantly fearing assassination and rebellion. He employs food tasters, travels in closed carriages, and trusts no one. The Young Turks, a reformist political movement, are gaining power and influence, seeking to undermine his authority at every turn. To the Sultan's mind, this is not a mere theft, it is a calculated psychological attack. A demonstration by his enemies that they can penetrate his most secure sanctum and replace his most guarded treasure without raising an alarm. It is a pantomime designed to humiliate him. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. If the Sultan's paranoia is vindicated, it means the enemies are within his very gates, perhaps standing guard outside his bedchamber. If he is merely suffering from a delusion and the horse is genuine, then he risks appearing mad to his court, thereby giving the Young Turks the very ammunition they need to dethrone him. It is a delicate situation, I murmured, realizing the gravity of the political implications. A single misstep could spark a revolution. It is a powder keg, Watson, and someone has struck a match. The political consequences of the gravest kind might arise from its neglect. We must make haste. There is a train from Charing Cross in 2 hours. The journey across Europe on the Orient Express was an exercise in luxurious impatience. While our fellow passengers revelled in the opulent dining cars, partaking of caviar and champagne, and marvelled at the sweeping vistas of the snow-capped Alps and the rugged Balkans, Holmes remained sequestered in our compartment. He was surrounded by a mountain of books and maps he had hastily procured from a specialist bookseller before our departure. He immersed himself in the history of the Ottoman Empire, the intricacies of the Young Turk movement, and, most surprisingly, exhaustive treatises on equine anatomy and the breeding of the Akal Teke horse. "It is a fascinating breed, Watson," Holmes remarked one evening as our train thundered through the plains of Hungary, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels providing a steady backdrop to his lecture. "The Akal Teke, hailing from the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan, they are known for their incredible speed, endurance, and a distinctive metallic sheen to their coat. They are also famously loyal, often bonding with only one rider, much like a hound, a detail that may prove crucial." "You believe the horse's behaviour towards the Sultan has changed?" I asked, looking up from my own reading, a somewhat less taxing novel. It is the only logical explanation for his absolute certainty that the animal is a counterfeit, assuming, of course, that the physical resemblance is as flawless as his letter suggests. We must be prepared to examine not just a horse, but a masterpiece of equine forgery. Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create a double. On the evening of our 4th day of travel, the sprawling, magnificent silhouette of Constantinople came into view. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the waters of the Golden Horn and the Bosphorus, while the minarets of the Hagia Sophia and the blue mosque pierced the violet sky like the lances of an ethereal army. It was a city of startling contrasts, where the ancient and the modern, the East and the West, collided in a dizzying mosaic of sights, sounds and smells. We were met at the Sirkachi terminal by a discreet emissary, a tall, severe-looking man named Ferid Pasha, who whisked us into a close carriage. The journey through the bustling, narrow streets was fraught with the noise of hawkers calling out their wares, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, and the exotic scent of spices, roasting meats, and sweet tobacco. "The Sultan is most anxious for your arrival, Mr. Holmes," Ferid Pasha said, his English impeccable, though coloured by a thick, guttural accent. He sat rigidly, his hands resting on the silver pommel of a cane. "The situation at the Yildiz Palace grows more tense by the hour. His Majesty trusts no one, not even his closest advisers." "A prudent policy for a monarch in his position," Holmes observed dryly. "Tell me, Pasha, how many people have access to the private stables?" "Very few. The chief groom, a man named Hassan, and a select detail of the Imperial Guard. The stables are guarded day and night. It is a fortress within a fortress. And yet a substitution was allegedly made. On what day did the Sultan first notice the discrepancy?" "3 days before the letter was dispatched to London. He went to ride Ruzgar at dawn, as is his custom. He returned within 10 minutes, pale and furious, declaring the animal an impostor." "Did you observe the horse yourself, Pasha?" "I am no equestrian expert, Mr. Holmes, but to my eyes it is the same magnificent creature that has occupied that stall for the past 4 years. The same golden dun coat, the same white star on the forehead, the exact same height and build. I fear—" He trailed off, glancing nervously out the window. "You fear the Sultan is losing his mind?" Holmes finished for him. Ferid Pasha did not reply, but his silence was answer enough. Holmes leaned back, his eyes glittering in the dim light of the carriage. "We shall see, Pasha. We shall see." The Yildiz Palace was not a single imposing edifice, but a sprawling fortified complex of pavilions, gardens and courtyards set upon a hill overlooking the Bosphorus. The atmosphere within its walls was suffocatingly tense. Guards stood at rigid attention at every corner, their eyes scanning the shadows with nervous vigilance. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the unspoken fear of treason. We were ushered into a sumptuous audience chamber, the walls adorned with intricate Iznik tiles in vibrant blues and greens, and the floors covered in priceless silk carpets that muted our footsteps. At the far end of the room, seated upon a low divan, was Sultan Abdul Hamid II. He was a man of slight build, with a prominent hooked nose, a carefully trimmed dark beard, and eyes that darted restlessly, reflecting an intellect sharpened by a lifetime of anticipating betrayal. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," the Sultan said, his voice soft but commanding. Ferid Pasha translated his words, though the Sultan's piercing gaze remained fixed on Holmes, studying him intently. "Your reputation precedes you. I am told you see what others do not. I need your eyes." "Your Majesty," Holmes replied with a slight bow, "I am at your service. Let us dispense with pleasantries. You have a horse that you believe is not your horse." The Sultan's jaw tightened. "It is a mockery, a phantom designed to mock me. They whisper behind my back, the pashas and the viziers. They think I'm losing my mind. They think the young Turks have outsmarted me. But I know my horse. Rusgar knows my touch. When I approached this creature, it did not nicker a greeting. When I mounted, its gait was subtly different. Its spirit is wrong. It lacks the fire of the true wind. Animals have their moods, Your Majesty, I ventured softly, mindful of the danger of contradicting an absolute monarch. Perhaps the heat, or a slight indisposition. The Sultan silenced me with a venomous look. I have ridden Rusgar into battle and across deserts, Doctor. I know the rhythm of his heart beneath my heels. I have fed him from my own hand. This horse is a fraud. Holmes stepped forward, his face impassive. If it is a fraud, Your Majesty, it will leave a trail. There is no such thing as a perfect crime, nor a perfect duplicate. May I examine the animal? The Sultan gestured to Ferid Pasha. Take him to the stables, give him whatever he needs. But Mr. Holmes, the Sultan added, leaning forward, his voice a sibilant whisper, do not fail me. My throne may rest upon the back of that missing horse. The imperial stables were a marvel of equine luxury, with stalls carved from polished cedar and fittings of gleaming brass. The air was fragrant with sweet hay and the musky scent of well-groomed animals. In the largest central stall, under the watchful eyes of 4 armed guards, stood the centre of our investigation. It was, without question, a breathtaking specimen. The stallion possessed the sleek, almost greyhound-like build typical of the Akhal-Teke. Its coat was a remarkable shade of golden dun, and under the lantern light it possessed a metallic, iridescent sheen that made it look as though it had been cast from spun gold. A perfect white star graced its forehead, and its long, slender legs ended in dark, meticulously cared-for hooves. Magnificent, I breathed, stepping up to the stall. The horse tossed its head, eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and haughty indifference. Holmes, however, was already at work. He produced a large magnifying glass from his pocket and began a slow, meticulous circumambulation of the animal. He examined the white star on its forehead with intense scrutiny, brushing his fingers against the hair, smelling his fingertips, and even tasting a minute particle he found there. He ran his hands along the horse's flanks, feeling the musculature, his face a mask of supreme concentration. He then dropped to his knees, much to the consternation of the guards, and examined the horse's legs and hooves. For 10 minutes the only sound in the stable was the soft breathing of the horse and the occasional scrape of Holmes's boots against the stone floor. Finally he stood up, dusting off his knees, his eyes blazing with the cold fire of intellectual triumph. "Well, Holmes?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. "Is the Sultan mad?" "On the contrary, Watson, the Sultan's instincts are terrifyingly sharp. The man is completely sane and a victim of a conspiracy of staggering audacity." Ferid Pasha stepped forward, his face ashen. "You mean it is an impostor?" "Oh, it is a brilliantly executed fake, Pasha. A masterpiece of deception," Holmes replied, his voice ringing with professional admiration. "Consider the evidence, Watson. The white star on the forehead. To the naked eye it is perfect, but under magnification one can see that the underlying skin is dark, not pink as it should be under natural white markings. The hair has been bleached with a weak solution of hydrogen peroxide and ammonia. I could taste the faint residue. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "Furthermore," Holmes continued, gesturing to the horse's flanks, "the metallic sheen of the coat. It is a hallmark of the Akhal-Teke, yes, but this sheen is slightly too uniform. The true metallic gloss comes from the hollow structure of the hair shaft refracting light. This coat has been treated with a subtle application of macadamia nut oil and a very fine dust of crushed mica. It gives a brilliant illusion, but it leaves a faint, oily residue upon the fingers. He pointed a long, accusatory finger at the horse's hooves. But the final, undeniable proof lies at our feet. Look at the shoes, Watson. I peered at the hooves, but saw nothing amiss. They appear to be standard horseshoes, Holmes. They are, but observe the wear pattern on the iron. The wear is predominantly on the inside edge of the front shoes. This indicates a horse that is slightly pigeon-toed. However, if you examine the muscle development of the forearms, it contradicts this stance. This horse has only recently been fitted with these shoes, designed to mimic the exact tread of the real Rizgar. But they cannot fake the muscle memory of the animal. The Sultan was right. The gait is different because the horse is compensating for shoes that do not match its natural stride. Ferid Pasha looked as though he might faint. But how? How could such a creature be substituted under the very noses of the Imperial Guard? That is the next stage of our inquiry, Holmes said briskly. I must speak with the chief groom, Hassan. Hassan was brought before us trembling. He was a burly man, with a weathered face and eyes wide with terror. He knew that the Sultan's wrath meant certain death. Holmes approached him slowly, his demeanour surprisingly gentle. "Do not fear, Hassan. I am not here to condemn you, but to find the truth. You love the horses, do you not?" "More than my own life, Effendi," Hassan sobbed, falling to his knees. "I swear by the Prophet, I do not know how this happened. I lock the stables myself every night. I have the only key." "And the guards?" "They patrol the perimeter. No one can enter without passing them." "Let us look at that key," Holmes requested. Hassan produced a heavy iron key from his tunic. Holmes examined it closely with his lens. "Ah," he murmured softly. "Do you see this, Watson?" He pointed to a tiny scratch near the wards of the key. A fresh scratch, and deep inside the groove a microscopic trace of greyish material. "Wax, Watson. Someone has taken an impression of this key. Hassan, has this key ever left your person?" "Never, Effendi, except—" Hassan hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Except when I attend the baths on Fridays. I leave my clothes in the secure lockers." "Secure lockers," Holmes chuckled humorlessly. "There is no such thing when a determined conspiracy is at work. So a duplicate key was fashioned. That explains the access. But it does not explain how one smuggles a stallion into the Yildiz palace and smuggles another out without being seen. A horse is not a pocket watch, Pasha. One cannot slip it up one's sleeve." Holmes began to pace the length of the stable, his hands clasped behind his back, his head bowed. "The substitution must have occurred at night. The horses must have been swapped seamlessly. But how to bypass the guards?" He stopped suddenly, his eyes darting toward the rear of the stable. "Pasha, what lies beyond that rear wall?" "Nothing, Mr. Holmes. It is the outer wall of the palace grounds. It drops sheer down a steep embankment to the woods of the park." "Is there a door?" "There is a small postern gate, used only for the disposal of manure and soiled bedding. It is locked from the inside and heavily barred." Holmes strode to the rear of the stables. A large, reinforced wooden door stood there. He examined the heavy iron bolt. He ran his fingers along the bottom edge of the door, then brought them to his nose. Manure, yes, but also coal dust, and the distinct scent of damp river mud. The Bosphorus, if I am not mistaken. He threw back the heavy bolt, which slid with surprising ease, and pushed the door open. The night air rushed in. Below us, a steep, treacherous path wound down through dense trees toward the distant shimmer of the strait. "The bolt has been recently oiled," Holmes noted. "And look here, on the stone threshold." He knelt and pointed with a slim pocket torch. In the soft earth just beyond the threshold were the clear indentations of horseshoes. "2 sets of tracks," Holmes said, his voice taut with excitement. "One leading out, one leading in." The substitution was made here through the manure gate in the dead of night. The guards at the front were completely bypassed. "But moving horses down that steep slope in the dark," I objected. "It would be perilous." "Perilous, but not impossible for skilled handlers. The young Turks have organized a daring and meticulously planned operation. They have the real Ruzgar, and they have left this painted substitute in his place. The question is, where have they taken the Sultan's prize, and for what purpose?" Holmes stood up, brushing the dirt from his trousers. "Pasha, the Sultan's paranoia is entirely justified. This is a masterstroke of psychological warfare. If the Sultan announces the theft, he admits his vulnerability. If he remains silent, he is forced to ride a painted mockery, knowing his enemies are laughing at him. And what will they do with the real horse? They will not kill it. That would waste the political capital." "What do you propose they will do, Holmes?" I asked. "They will display it, Watson. They will use it as a symbol. A public demonstration that the Sultan cannot even protect his own sacred stallion. They will parade Ruzgar before the populace, perhaps at one of their clandestine political rallies, to shatter the myth of Abdul Hamid's invincibility. It will be the spark that ignites a revolution." Ferid Pasha gasped. "We must find the horse before they can act. The Sultan will burn the city to the ground if this happens." "Calm yourself, Pasha," Holmes said firmly. "We have the thread, and we must follow it through the labyrinth." The men who took the horse left tracks, mud from the Bosphorus. They transported the animal by water. The true investigation begins now. Watson, fetch your revolver. The streets of Constantinople are about to become our hunting ground. The following morning found Sherlock Holmes entirely transformed. Gone was the crisp English gentleman in his worsted suit. In his place stood a stooped, sun-beaten figure, clad in the baggy trousers, worn sash, and faded fez of a lowly harbour labourer. His skin had been darkened with walnut juice, and his face was smeared with grime. He looked every inch a man who spent his days hauling cargo on the docks of the Golden Horn. "A necessary precaution, Watson," he rasped, his voice dropping an octave to match his rough exterior. "The agents of the Young Turks are everywhere. If they spot an English detective asking questions about horses, the prize will disappear forever. You, my friend, must play the part of a wealthy, eccentric British tourist, a man with a keen interest in acquiring exotic antiquities. It will give you an excuse to wander the bazaars and waterfronts while I delve into the shadows." Our theatre of operations was the labyrinthine district of Galata, a chaotic, teeming hive of commerce and intrigue that spilled down the hills to the water's edge. While I dutifully haggled over brass lamps and silk carpets in the Grand Bazaar, loudly proclaiming my British ignorance to anyone who would listen, Holmes vanished into the underworld. For 2 days I saw nothing of him. I returned to our discreet lodgings near Pera each evening, anxious and restless, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. The political temperature of the city was palpably rising. Whispers of a great demonstration planned for the coming Friday, the Muslim holy day, were circulating through the cafes and tea-houses. The deadline was rapidly approaching. On the night of the second day, a soft scratching at the door roused me from a fitful sleep. I drew my revolver and approached cautiously. "It is I, Watson. Open up." I unbolted the door, and Holmes slipped inside, moving with the silent grace of a shadow. He looked exhausted, his disguise covered in genuine muck and sweat, but his eyes burned with that familiar predatory fire. "Success, Holmes?" I asked, pouring him a stiff measure of brandy. He downed it in a single gulp and sank into a chair. "The underworld of Constantinople is a complex web, Watson, but human nature remains the same whether in Whitechapel or the Golden Horn. A secret known to more than 2 people is no longer a secret. I have spent the last 48 hours fraternizing with smugglers, lightermen, and political dissidents in the smoke-filled Nargile cafes of the waterfront. And the horse? I tracked the mud. The greyish clay I found at the stable door is distinctive. It matches the mud banks of a specific secluded cove on the Asian side of the Bosphorus, near Üsküdar. I spoke with a ferryman, a man easily persuaded by a handful of lira, who recalled being hired late at night 4 days ago to transport a sick horse across the strait. He was paid handsomely to ask no questions. "So Ruzgar is in Üsküdar?" "He was," Holmes corrected, "but they are preparing to move him. The rumours you heard are true, Watson. The Young Turks are planning a massive unsanctioned rally tomorrow evening, just after Friday prayers, in the Hippodrome Square. They intend to parade the Sultan's prize stallion before the crowds, revealing the painted impostor at the palace and declaring the Sultan unfit to rule. It is a coup de théâtre. Then we must inform Ferid Pasha immediately. The army can raid the location." "No!" Holmes barked, slamming his hand on the table. "If the army moves in, it will precipitate a bloodbath. The Young Turks are fanatical. They will kill the horse rather than surrender it, and the Sultan's humiliation will be complete. Furthermore, a military raid would validate the rebellion. We must steal the horse back as quietly as it was taken. A phantom for a phantom." "Steal it back? Just the 2 of us?" "The element of surprise is our greatest weapon, Watson. I have located the hideout. It is an abandoned Byzantine cistern beneath a crumbling merchant's house in the hills of Üsküdar. It is guarded, but not heavily. They rely on secrecy rather than force. We strike tonight." The crossing of the Bosphorus under the cover of darkness was an eerie experience. We hired a small, silent skiff, the boatman pulling at the muffled oars as we glided over the ink-black water. The city behind us was a constellation of twinkling lights, while the Asian shore loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. We disembarked at the secluded cove Holmes had identified. The shoreline was thick with reeds and heavy grey mud, the exact mud that had betrayed the conspirators. Holmes, having discarded his labourer's disguise for dark, form-fitting clothing, led the way up the steep incline. We moved through narrow, winding alleys, avoiding the occasional glow of a night watchman's lantern. The air grew cooler as we climbed, away from the humid embrace of the water. Finally, Holmes raised a hand, signalling a halt. We crouched behind a low stone wall. Before us stood a dilapidated two-story wooden house, its windows boarded up. "Beneath this house," Holmes whispered, "lies an ancient cistern built by the Emperor Justinian. It is dry now and serves as a perfect subterranean stable. The entrance is through the cellar." "How many guards?" I asked, checking the cylinder of my Webley. I observed 3 men earlier, armed but undisciplined. "They are political idealists, Watson, not professional soldiers. That is our advantage." We crept towards the rear of the house. A heavy wooden door led to the cellar. Holmes produced his lockpicks, his slender fingers working with blind precision in the dark. Within seconds, a soft click signalled his success. We eased the door open and slipped inside. The air was instantly cooler, smelling of ancient stone, damp earth, and the unmistakable scent of horses. A faint glow of lantern light emanated from a stone archway at the far end of the cellar. We crept forward, our footfalls silent on the packed dirt. As we neared the archway, the sound of low voices reached us, speaking rapidly in Turkish. Peering around the edge of the stone, I beheld the ancient cistern. It was a vast, cavernous space, its vaulted ceiling supported by rows of carved stone columns. In the centre of the subterranean chamber, tied to a heavy iron ring, stood the magnificent form of Ruzgar. Even in the dim lantern light, the stallion radiated power and grace. He pawed the ground restlessly, his ears pinned back, clearly distressed by his confinement. 3 men sat around a small brazier near the entrance, smoking cigarettes and arguing quietly. They wore the rough clothing of city workers, but the Mauser rifles slung across their backs belied their civilian appearance. "We must act swiftly and silently," Holmes breathed into my ear. "If a shot is fired, it will echo through the neighbourhood and bring a swarm of them down upon us. I will take the 2 on the right, you take the 1 on the left. We use the element of surprise to disarm them, not kill them if it can be avoided. Ready?" I nodded, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Now!" We sprang from the shadows like unleashed hounds. The suddenness of our attack caught the guards completely off guard. Holmes lunged at the 2 men on the right, his walking stick lashing out with the speed and precision of a fencer. The heavy silver knob struck the first man squarely on the temple, dropping him instantly. Before the second man could unsling his rifle, Holmes had pivoted, delivering a savage kick to the man's knee and following it with a decisive blow to the jaw. My own target managed to scramble to his feet, a cry of alarm rising in his throat. I tackled him around the midsection, driving him hard into the stone floor. He fought fiercely, his hands clawing at my face, but I managed to pin his arms. With a sudden surge of desperation, he kicked out, sending a loose stone skittering across the floor with a loud crack that echoed sharply off the ancient columns. I quickly brought the heavy barrel of my revolver down upon his skull, and he went limp beneath me. The silence rushed back into the cistern, broken only by our heavy breathing, the echoing crack of the stone, and the startled snorting of the stallion. Holmes wasted no time. He snatched up a coil of rope and swiftly bound the unconscious men, gagging them with torn strips of their own clothing. "Excellent work, Watson," he said calmly, as though we had just concluded a friendly game of billiards. "Now for the prize." He approached Ruzgar slowly, murmuring softly in a calming, rhythmic tone. The great horse tossed its head, its eyes wide with fear, and stomped a heavy hoof against the floor, a nervous sound that reverberated in the stillness. But as Holmes reached out and stroked its velvet muzzle, the animal began to settle. "A true aristocrat," Holmes whispered, untying the lead rope. "He knows when he is in the presence of friends. Come, boy, we are going home." Leading a highly strung stallion up a set of stone cellar steps and out into the night was no small feat, but Holmes managed the animal with masterful skill. We retraced our steps through the sleeping streets of Üsküdar, moving as swiftly as we dared. Our boatman was waiting at the cove, his eyes widening in terror as we emerged from the shadows, leading the massive horse. "We cannot put a horse in this skiff," he protested, shaking his head violently. "We do not intend to," Holmes replied, pressing a heavy purse of gold into the man's trembling hand. "You will row alongside us. The horse will swim." "Swim? Across the Bosphorus in the dark?" I exclaimed. "Holmes, is it possible?" "Akaltekes are renowned swimmers, Watson, and it is the only way. If we attempt to use a ferry, we will be discovered." Holmes stripped off his jacket and boots. Taking the lead rope in his teeth, he waded into the dark waters of the strait. I climbed into the skiff, keeping my revolver ready. Ruzgar hesitated at the water's edge, whinnying softly, but Holmes pulled gently on the rope, calling to him. With a powerful surge, the stallion plunged into the water. The crossing was an ordeal I shall never forget. The currents of the Bosphorus were treacherous, pulling fiercely at the horse and the swimmer. Holmes swam with steady, powerful strokes, guiding the stallion while the boatman rowed desperately to keep pace. I watched the great golden head of the horse bobbing above the black water, its nostrils flaring as it fought the current. Midway across, a low-slung patrol boat emerged from the darkness, its lantern sweeping over the water like a searching eye. I held my breath, gripping my revolver tight, but the boatman expertly angled our skiff so that it shielded the swimming horse from view, just long enough for the patrol to pass. It took nearly an hour to reach the European shore. Holmes dragged himself out of the water, shivering violently, but his grip on the lead rope never faltered. Ruzgar emerged beside him, his coat plastered to his sleek musculature, shaking the water from his mane like a triumphant sea god. We navigated the steep, wooded embankment beneath the Yildiz Palace, tracing the exact route the thieves had taken days before. As we approached the heavy wooden manure gate, Holmes signalled for me to halt. He crept forward, pressing his ear to the wood. He then tapped out a low, complex rhythm on the door. A moment later, the heavy iron bolt slid back, and the door opened a crack. Ferid Pasha's pale, strained face appeared in the gap. He gasped as he saw us and threw the door wide. "Allah be praised!" he whispered fiercely, ushering us inside. "I have paced this stable for 2 nights, praying you would return. The Sultan is on the verge of ordering executions. You may inform His Majesty that his executions are unnecessary," Holmes said, his teeth chattering slightly as he handed the lead rope to the stunned chief groom, Hassan. "The true Ruzgar has returned." In the centre stall, the painted impostor stood, ignorant of the drama unfolding around it. Holmes swiftly directed Hassan to move the fake to a secluded stall in the far wing of the complex, and Ruzgar was led to his rightful place. Hassan fell upon the stallion, weeping openly, burying his face in the wet mane. The horse, recognizing its master and its home, let out a long, contented nicker. "It is done," Holmes said, wrapping himself in a heavy blanket Ferid Pasha provided. By the time the sun rises, the Sultan will find his horse exactly as it should be. The impostor can be quietly disposed of, perhaps sold to a travelling circus, for it is certainly a clever trick. The young Turks will arrive at their rally tomorrow with an empty stable and a shattered plan. The Sultan's myth remains intact. Ferid Pasha seized Holmes's hand, his eyes shining with tears of relief. "You have saved the empire, Mr. Holmes. The Sultan's gratitude will be boundless. Name your reward." Holmes smiled faintly, the weariness finally showing on his face. "My reward, Pasha, is the problem itself. Though I must admit, a hot bath, dry clothes, and a ticket on the first train back to London would be highly appreciated. The air of Constantinople is somewhat too heavily perfumed with treason for my English tastes." 3 days later, we were comfortably ensconced in our first-class compartment on the Orient Express, thundering back towards the grey, comforting skies of England. The opulence of the Sultan's parting gifts, a magnificent jewelled scimitar for me, and a flawless emerald tie-pin for Holmes, were safely stowed in our luggage. Holmes sat opposite me, his long legs stretched out, happily wreathed in the smoke of his pipe. "A singular case, Watson," he mused, staring out at the passing landscape of the Balkans. "It highlights the fragility of absolute power. The Sultan commands millions, yet his entire reign was nearly undone by a bottle of hair bleach and a handful of crushed mica." "It was a brilliant deduction, Holmes," I said, realizing the horse was a fake from the shoes. "The shoes were the confirming evidence, Watson, but the truth was evident from the moment the Sultan expressed his doubts. Absolute monarchs are rarely wrong about their immediate possessions. Their paranoia makes them the most acute observers of their own environment. The challenge was not proving the horse was fake, but understanding the political mechanism behind the forgery." "The young Turks must be reeling," I noted. Holmes chuckled. "I should very much like to have seen their faces when they arrived at the Justinian cistern to find their prize missing and their guards bound with English rope. They will not attempt such a stunt again. We have bought the Sultan time, Watson, though looking at the political currents of this region, I fear time is the one thing the Ottoman Empire has very little of." And as the train hurtled across the continent, bearing us away from the exotic perils of the East, Sherlock Holmes tucked his Stradivarius beneath his chin and began to play a lively, triumphant air, the perfect coda to our adventure on the Bosphorus. "You know, Watson," Holmes said after several moments, lowering his bow as the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels provided a steady undercurrent to his voice, "the matter of that duplicated key is one that still deserves further contemplation. It speaks to a level of internal corruption that the Sultan will need to root out if he wishes to survive the decade." "Internal corruption? You mean Hassan, the groom?" No, Hassan is a simple man, devoted to his charges. His terror was entirely genuine. No, the wax impression could only have been taken at the public baths, as I deduced. But consider the logistics. To know exactly which locker Hassan used, to have the wax prepared, to pick the locker lock, make the impression, and return the key without alerting a man whose life depends on that key. It requires precision, timing, and inside knowledge. One of the guards, perhaps? Almost certainly. A captain of the guard, someone whose presence at the baths alongside Hassan would not arouse suspicion. I penned a brief note to Ferid Pasha before our departure, suggesting he scrutinise the bank accounts of the Imperial Guard officers who frequent that particular bathhouse. I suspect he will find a sudden and inexplicable influx of foreign currency in one of them. "You are relentless, Holmes," I smiled. "You solve the case, and yet you continue to pull at the loose threads." "A case is never truly closed, Watson, until all the threads are neatly tied and the underlying pattern is fully understood. The Young Turks did not act alone. To procure an akal teke of such similar build and markings to Ruzgar, even before the cosmetic alterations, requires immense resources and a profound knowledge of the horse markets of Central Asia. Someone wealthy, someone with extensive trade connections, financed this operation. A Russian agent, perhaps?" I ventured, knowing the great game between the British and Russian empires was always at play in this region. Holmes nodded approvingly. "A distinct possibility, Watson. The Russians have long coveted control of the Bosphorus. Destabilizing the Sultan would serve their interests perfectly. In fact, while I was mingling with the lightermen on the docks of Galata, I noted a significant presence of Russian merchant vessels that seemed to be sitting very low in the water, yet unloading very little cargo. Smuggling arms, perhaps, or smuggling gold to fund revolutionary factions." He picked up his bow again and played a slow, mournful chord. "The political machinations of the East are like a game of chess played in a dark room, Watson. We have merely captured a single pawn and protected the king. The game itself rages on." This sense of an ongoing shadowed game lingered with us as our journey back through Europe became a slow transition from the vibrant, dangerous heat of the Ottoman Empire to the ordered, mechanized pulse of Western Europe. In Paris we stopped for a night at the Hôtel du Louvre, a jarring return to gaslight and polite society. Holmes spent the evening at the Paris Opera, not for the music, he claimed, but to observe the facial structures of the French aristocracy, a pet study of his at the time. By the time we crossed the Channel and arrived at Victoria Station, the blistering heat wave that had plagued London upon our departure had broken. A cool, steady drizzle was falling, painting the cobblestones black and reflecting the yellow glow of the street lamps. It was a miserable, damp evening, yet as we hailed a hansom cab and clattered toward Baker Street, I felt a profound sense of comfort. Mrs. Hudson was overjoyed to see us, her face lighting up as we hauled our trunks up the 17 steps to our sitting room. The room was exactly as we had left it. The acid stains on the table, the Persian slipper containing tobacco, the correspondence pinned to the mantelpiece with a jackknife. "It is good to be home, Holmes," I sighed, sinking into my favourite armchair and stretching my legs toward the empty grate. "It has its charms, Watson, I must confess," Holmes agreed, tossing his Inverness cape over a chair. He immediately walked to the mantelpiece and began rifling through the accumulated telegrams and letters. "Ah," he murmured, pulling out a flimsy piece of paper. "It seems the criminal classes of London have not been entirely idle in our absence. Lestrade is baffled by a locked-room murder in a terraced house in Stepney. The victim found drowned in a dry bathtub, with no sign of forced entry, and the door bolted from the inside." He turned to me, his eyes sparking with that familiar restless energy. "The engine is idling once more, Watson. The Bosphorus is behind us, and the murky waters of the Thames await. Shall we plunge in?" "Tomorrow, Holmes," I laughed, closing my eyes. "Let the Thames wait until tomorrow." Holmes chuckled, a rare sound of genuine amusement. "Tomorrow it is, Watson. The Sultan's stallion is safe, the Empire stands for another day, and Baker Street is back in business. The world is a sufficiently strange place, my friend, and we are fortunate indeed to be its students. Thanks for joining me for another original mystery. Do not forget to check out our Patreon down below to support the channel.